The silver picture frame slipped from her trembling fingers and shattered against the marble floor. Elena froze, staring at the photograph, a woman she recognized instantly, holding a baby boy with dark eyes. Her dark eyes. Her son's eyes. The door behind her clicked open, and that voice, the one that had haunted her for 30 years, cut through the silence like a blade. "I don't pay you to break my things." She turned slowly. He stood in the doorway of his penthouse office, 6 feet of tailored power and cold authority. Dante Russo, the most feared mafia boss in New York. The baby she'd given up when she was 16 because she had nothing, not even a name anyone would respect. He didn't recognize her. Why would he? She was just another invisible woman in a gray uniform, 50 pounds heavier, 30 years older, with hands destroyed by decades of cleaning other people's messes. But she knew him. God, she knew every feature of that face. "I'm sorry, Mr. Russo," she whispered, kneeling to gather the shattered glass, her heart shattering with it. He stepped closer, and the whole world held its breath. This is a story about secrets that span decades, about a mother's unbreakable love, and about the moment when the past collides with the present in the most devastating way possible. If you want to discover how Elena's secret unravels and whether Dante will ever learn the truth, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Every view, every subscription, helps us bring you more stories like this one. Elena Moretti had been invisible her entire life. At 16, she'd been the pregnant teenager everyone whispered about in the Brooklyn foster home. At 19, the single mother working 3 jobs who still couldn't afford to keep her child. At 20, the woman who signed away her parental rights with tears streaming down her face, praying that somewhere, somehow, her baby boy would have the life she couldn't give him. Now, at 46, she was the cleaning woman nobody looked at twice. 3 mornings a week, Elena rode 2 buses from her cramped studio in Queens to the glittering Manhattan Tower where Dante Russo owned the entire top floor. She arrived at 6 a.m., always exactly on time, always invisible in her gray uniform. She cleaned his penthouse in silence while he conducted his business, the kind of business that made grown men flinch and cops look the other way. She'd been working for him for 3 months. 3 months of agony and blessing, of being so close to her son she could smell his cologne in the air, yet so impossibly far away that she might as well be on another planet. The agency that hired her had been desperate. Nobody wanted to work for Dante Russo. His last 5 cleaners had quit within weeks, terrified by the armed guards, the late-night meetings, the blood she'd once found on a bathroom floor, though she'd cleaned it without comment, without question, because that's what invisible women did. But Elena would have walked through fire for the chance to be near him. Every morning, she studied him from the corner of her eye while she dusted and vacuumed. The way he moved, confident, lethal, commanding. The sharp intelligence in those dark eyes that she'd given him. The stubborn set of his jaw that came from her side of the family. The way his rare smiles never quite reached those eyes, as if he'd learned early that showing warmth was a weakness. He'd been adopted by the Russo family when he was 3. She'd learned that from whispered conversations she'd overheard between his bodyguards. The Russos had raised him in their world of power and violence, had molded him into the perfect successor to their empire. But before that, for 3 precious years, he'd been hers. And then she'd given him away because loving him meant wanting more for him than she could ever provide. Elena. His voice snapped her back to the present. She'd been standing in the middle of his living room, staring at nothing, the feather duster forgotten in her hand. "Yes, Mr. Russo?" She kept her eyes down, the way she'd learned to do. "There's a mess in the East guest room." His tone was clipped, businesslike. "Some associates got enthusiastic last night. I need it spotless by noon." "Of course, Mr. Russo." She moved past him, careful not to get too close, and her heart nearly stopped when he spoke again. "You're different from the others." Elena's breath caught. She forced herself to turn slowly, to meet his gaze for just a second before looking away. "Sir." "The other cleaners." "They were afraid." He tilted his head, studying her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You're not afraid of me." "Because you're my son," she thought. "Because I would die for you without hesitation. Because there's nothing in this world that could make me afraid of you." "I'm just here to do my job, Mr. Russo," she said quietly. Something flickered in his expression. Curiosity, perhaps. Then his phone rang, and the moment shattered. He turned away to answer it, already forgetting she existed. Elena escaped to the guest room, her hands shaking. The mess was worse than she'd expected. Broken glass, spilled whiskey, what looked like blood on the cream carpet. She got to work mechanically, her mind elsewhere. She'd thought seeing him would be enough. She'd thought she could do this, could clean his home, could exist in his orbit, could carry her secret to her grave and be satisfied with just these stolen moments of proximity. But every day was harder than the last. Every day, the urge to tell him grew stronger. Every day, she imagined what his face would look like if he knew. Would he be angry? Disgusted? Would he throw her out? Or, and this was the fantasy that kept her awake at night, would something in him recognize her? Would something in his DNA remember the woman who'd held him, who'd sung to him, who'd loved him more than her own life? She was scrubbing blood from the carpet when she heard the crash from the office. Then shouting. Men's voices, sharp with anger. Elena's instincts screamed at her to stay put, to keep her head down, to remain invisible. But that was her son's voice rising above the others, cold and deadly. She found herself moving toward the office before she could think better of it. The door was ajar. Through the gap, she could see Dante behind his massive desk and 3 men in suits standing across from him. One of them had a gun. "You disrespect my family, you disrespect me," the man with the gun was saying. His hand was shaking. "Amateur. The Morettis remember when your family was nothing." "We remember." "The Morettis," Dante interrupted, his voice like silk over steel, "are barely a footnote in this city's history. And if you pull that trigger, they won't even be that." The man's finger tightened on the trigger. Elena didn't think. She shoved the door open and walked in with a spray bottle and cloth. "Excuse me, Mr. Russo," she said, her voice steady despite the terror flooding her veins. "You asked me to clean the windows in here before noon." Every man in the room turned to stare at her. The tension didn't break. It shifted, finding a new target. "Get out," the man with the gun snarled. "She stays." Dante's voice cracked like a whip. His eyes were on her now, dark and unreadable. "She works for me. You threaten her, you threaten me. And we both know you're not that stupid, Marco." The man, Marco, lowered his gun slowly. "This isn't over, Russo. It's been over for 5 years. You just didn't know it yet." Dante stood, and even though he wasn't the one holding the weapon, everyone in the room took a step back. "Get out of my home. Don't come back." The 3 men left. Elena heard the elevator doors close behind them. Then it was just her and Dante, alone in the ringing silence. "What the hell," he said very quietly, "did you think you were doing?" Elena met his eyes. For the first time in 3 months, she really looked at him. And she saw something there that made her breath catch, something young and uncertain beneath all that controlled power. "Making sure you didn't do something you'd regret, Mr. Russo," she said softly. He stared at her for a long moment. Then, impossibly, he laughed, a short, sharp sound that held no humor. "You have no idea what I'm capable of regretting," he said. But she did. God help her, she did. Because she'd spent 30 years regretting the greatest decision of her life. The next morning, Elena arrived to find Dante waiting for her in the kitchen. He'd never been awake this early before. He was leaning against the granite counter in dark slacks and a white dress shirt, unbuttoned at the collar, holding a cup of espresso. His eyes tracked her as she entered. "Mr. Russo." She stopped in the doorway, unsure. "I can come back if—" "Sit down." It wasn't a request. Elena's heart hammered as she lowered herself into one of the sleek bar stools across from him. He studied her in silence, and she felt stripped bare under that gaze. "What's your last name?" he finally asked. "Moretti, sir." Something flickered across his face. "Like those idiots yesterday. It's a common Italian name." Her throat was dry. "How long have you been in New York?" "All my life. Family. None that matter." The words came out before she could stop them, raw and true. His eyes narrowed. "Why do you work for me?" "Because you're my son. Because I spent 30 years searching for you. Because when I finally found you, I couldn't stay away, even though I knew I should." "I need the money," she said instead. "You pay well." "I pay well because most people are too afraid to work for me." He set down his espresso cup with a soft click. "But you walked into a room with a loaded gun yesterday to clean my windows. You said you needed them cleaned." "Elena." The sound of her name in his voice made her want to weep. "Why aren't you afraid of me?" She met his gaze steadily. "Should I be?" "Yes." The word was flat, final. "I've done things that would make you run screaming from this building. I've survived things that would make you understand why I don't run anymore," she countered quietly. The silence stretched between them, heavy with things unspoken. Then Dante did something that shocked her. He pulled out the bar stool next to her and sat down. Close enough that she could smell his cologne, could see the faint scar on his left cheekbone. "Tell me," he said. So she did. Not everything, never everything, but pieces. Enough to paint a picture without revealing the whole truth. She told him about growing up in foster care, about being alone at 16, about learning that survival meant becoming invisible. She didn't tell him about the baby. She didn't tell him about signing papers with shaking hands, about walking away from the hospital with empty arms and a shattered heart. He listened without interrupting, and when she finished, something had shifted in his expression. "You had a child," he said. It wasn't a question. Elena's blood turned to ice. "What?" "The way you talk about being 16. The way you said survival meant becoming invisible right after mentioning that age." He tilted his head. "What happened to the baby?" She couldn't breathe. The kitchen walls were closing in, the air too thin. "I gave him up," she whispered. "I gave him to a family who could give him everything I couldn't." "Do you regret it?" The question was like a knife between her ribs. Elena looked at this man, this powerful, dangerous, brilliant man who had somehow survived and thrived despite everything, and felt tears burn behind her eyes. "Every day of my life," she said. "But I'd do it again. Because he deserved better than what I could give him." Dante was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood abruptly, and the vulnerability she'd glimpsed vanished behind his usual mask of control. "Get back to work," he said, his voice returning to that familiar cold clip. But as Elena stood to leave, he spoke again. "Elena." "Thank you." "For yesterday." She turned back, but he was already walking away, his phone pressed to his ear, barking orders in Italian. The weeks that followed were different. Dante started being there when she arrived. Started asking her questions, casual ones about her day, her neighborhood, whether she'd eaten breakfast. Started noticing things, like when she winced from the arthritis in her hands, or when she looked more tired than usual. One morning, she found a bottle of expensive joint pain medication on the kitchen counter with a note in sharp, masculine handwriting. "For your hands." Another day, he insisted on having his driver take her home. "It's on the way," he'd said, even though Queens was absolutely not on the way to anywhere he was going. Elena felt the walls she'd built around her secret beginning to crumble. It all came crashing down on a Tuesday afternoon. She was cleaning Dante's bedroom, a task she usually saved for when he was out because being in his most private space felt like a violation of every boundary she'd tried to maintain. But he'd left early for a meeting, and she'd thought she had time. She was wrong. The closet door swung open, and she instinctively reached out to steady it. Her hand landed on a leather box on the top shelf, and it tumbled down, contents spilling across the floor. Papers, photographs, and a birth certificate. Elena's hands trembled as she picked it up. Baby boy Moretti. Mother, Elena Grace Moretti. Father, unknown. The world tilted sideways. She heard footsteps in the hall, heard Dante's voice on the phone, getting closer. Reschedule it. I need to grab something from... He stopped in the bedroom doorway. Elena was still kneeling on the floor, surrounded by the contents of his past, the birth certificate clutched in her hands. Their eyes met. And in that moment, she watched him understand. She watched the pieces click into place, the common last name, her age, the way she'd said, "I gave him up," the reason she'd never been afraid of him. The color drained from his face. "No," he said. The word was barely audible. Elena's voice broke. "Dante, don't." He held up a hand, and she saw it was shaking. "Don't say my name like that. Don't." He stopped, his jaw working. "How long?" 3 months. Since I started working here. You knew. His voice was rising now, shaking with something she couldn't name. You've known this entire time. You've been, what? Watching me? Cleaning my home? Playing some kind of sick game? No. Elena struggled to her feet. No, I never meant. I just wanted to see you. To know you were okay. To what? He stepped into the room, and now she could see the rage burning in his eyes. To ease your guilt? To feel better about abandoning me? Each word was a bullet, and she took them all. I was 16 years old, she said, her voice breaking. I was living on the streets. I had nothing. No family, no money, no way to take care of you. The Russos, they gave you everything. They gave you a life I could never. They gave me this. He gestured sharply at himself, at the expensive suit, at the penthouse around them. They turned me into this. Is that what you wanted? Did you want your son to become a monster? You're not a monster. You don't know what I am. His laugh was bitter. You don't know anything about me. I know you, Elena said fiercely. I know you're brilliant and strong and protective of the people you care about. I know you carry the weight of your family's empire on your shoulders and never complain. I know you pretend not to notice when your bodyguard's kids have birthdays, but there are always gifts delivered anonymously. I know. Stop. His voice cracked. Just stop. They stared at each other across the room, and Elena saw her son, really saw him, for the first time. Not as the powerful MAFIA boss, but as the man underneath. The man who was 30 years old and just learned his entire life was built on a lie he hadn't known existed. I should have told you, she whispered. The moment I recognized you, I should have. Yes, you should have. He turned away, his shoulders rigid. Get out. Dante. Get out. The roar shook the walls. Get out of my home. Get out of my life. I don't want to see you again. Ever. Elena fled. She left the birth certificate on the floor, left her cleaning supplies, left everything except her purse. She stumbled into the elevator, tears streaming down her face, her chest so tight she couldn't breathe. The doors closed, and she collapsed against the wall, sobbing. She'd lost him 30 years ago when she'd given him up for adoption. Now she'd lost him all over again. Elena didn't sleep that night. Or the next. She lay in her tiny studio, staring at the water-stained ceiling, replaying the moment over and over. The agency called. Her services were no longer required at Mr. Russo's residence. No explanation. No severance. She didn't fight it. For 3 days, she existed in a fog. She couldn't eat. Could barely breathe. She'd known this day might come, had prepared herself for it, or thought she had. But nothing could have prepared her for the look in his eyes when he'd told her to get out. On the 4th day, her phone rang. Unknown number. Hello. Elena Moretti? A woman's voice, crisp and professional. Yes. This is Sophia Chen from Brighton Medical Center. I'm calling about Dante Russo. He's listed you as an emergency contact. Elena's world stopped. What happened? There was an incident. He's stable now, but he's asking for you. Are you able to come to the hospital? She was in a cab before the woman finished giving her the address. Brighton Medical Center was in Manhattan's financial district, the kind of hospital where entire floors could be rented for privacy. Elena rushed through the gleaming lobby to the elevators, her heart in her throat. The top floor was blocked by 2 men in black suits. Bodyguards. I'm Elena Moretti, she gasped. I got a call. One of them spoke into his wrist mic, then stepped aside. The hallway was eerily quiet. Elena's footsteps echoed on the polished floor as she followed the signs to the private suites. Room 1201. The door was ajar. She pushed it open slowly. Dante was sitting up in the hospital bed, white bandages wrapped around his ribs, a cut above his eyebrow. He looked exhausted, pale, and when his eyes met hers, something in them made her want to weep. You came, he said quietly. Of course I came. Elena moved to his bedside, her hands hovering uselessly. She wanted to touch him, to check for herself that he was okay, but she didn't dare. What happened? The Morettis. He laughed, then winced. Ironic, isn't it? They ambushed me yesterday. Left me for dead in an alley. Oh God. I'm fine. He waved off her concern. I've had worse. But while I was lying there, waiting for my men to find me, He stopped, jaw clenching. I kept thinking about what you said. About survival meaning becoming invisible. Elena waited, afraid to speak. I spent my whole life thinking I knew where I came from, Dante continued. The Russos took me in, raised me, made me who I am. I thought that was enough. I thought blood didn't matter as long as I had power. He looked at her, and his eyes were raw. But then I found out my mother was cleaning my floors, and it broke something in me. Dante. Let me finish. He took a shaky breath. I was angry. So angry. Not because you gave me up. I understand that now. You were 16. You had nothing. You made an impossible choice because you loved me. His voice cracked. I was angry because you came back. Because you were right there, close enough to touch, and I didn't know. I couldn't protect you. I couldn't. He stopped, turning his head away, but not before she saw the tears on his face. Elena's heart shattered. She reached out instinctively and took his hand. He gripped it like a lifeline. When I was in that alley, he whispered, all I could think was that I'd never told you I forgive you. That I'd never thanked you for giving me a chance at life, even though it meant you had to live with the pain of losing me. That I'd never— he looked at her, tears streaming down his face. That I'd never told you I understand. Oh, baby. The word slipped out before she could stop it, the endearment she'd whispered to him 30 years ago in a hospital bed much like this one, before she'd signed the papers that took him away forever. Dante pulled her into a fierce hug, mindless of his injuries. Elena wrapped her arms around him and held her son for the first time in 3 decades. They both wept. I'm sorry, she sobbed into his shoulder. "I'm so sorry. Every day I wondered if I made the right choice. Every day I prayed you were happy, that you were safe, that you—" "You did make the right choice," he said roughly. "The Russos, they're not perfect, but they gave me opportunities you couldn't have. They gave me power. They gave me a family. They gave you everything I couldn't," Elena agreed. "No." He pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "They gave me everything except what I needed most. They gave me everything except you." Fresh tears spilled down Elena's cheeks. "I want to know you," Dante said. "Really know you. Not as my cleaner, not as some woman I pay. As my mother." The word sounded strange in his mouth, unpracticed. "If you want that. If you—" "Yes." Elena didn't let him finish. "Yes. God, yes." He smiled, a real smile this time, one that reached his eyes and transformed his whole face. "Okay," he said. "Okay. We'll figure this out. Together." Elena nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Her son was holding her hand. After 30 years, her son was holding her hand. A nurse knocked softly on the door. "Mr. Russo, I hate to interrupt, but there are several gentlemen in the waiting room who are becoming insistent about seeing you." Dante sighed. "My brothers. Not by blood, the Russo sons. They probably think I'm dying." "Should I let them in?" the nurse asked nervously. "Give us 5 minutes," Dante said. Then to Elena, "Stay. Please. I want them to meet you." "Are you sure?" "I've spent 30 years hiding parts of myself," he said. "I'm done hiding." When the Russo brothers entered, 4 large men who radiated the same dangerous power as Dante, Elena felt her instincts scream at her to make herself small, to become invisible. But Dante kept hold of her hand. "This is Elena Moretti," he said clearly. "My mother." The shock on their faces would have been comical in any other situation. "You're what?" The oldest one, Marco, she thought, demanded. "My biological mother." Dante's voice was steady. "And from now on, she's under my protection. Anyone who touches her answers to me." The brothers exchanged glances, and Elena saw the calculations happening behind their eyes. This was a vulnerability, a weakness they could exploit. But then Marco stepped forward and extended his hand. "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Moretti," he said. It was a test, and they all knew it. But it was also an acceptance. Elena took his hand. "Thank you." One by one, the others followed suit, shaking her hand, nodding their respect. Because Dante had claimed her. And in their world, that meant something. When they finally left, Elena turned to her son. "They'll use this against you," she said quietly. "Having a mother, a weakness like me, it makes you vulnerable." "Let them try," Dante said simply. "I spent my whole life being strong by being alone. Maybe it's time I learned a different kind of strength." Elena's heart swelled. "Besides," he added with a slight smile, "anyone who comes after you will have to go through me first. And I'm very good at protecting what's mine." "I can take care of myself," she protested. "I know." His smile widened. "You proved that when you walked into a room with a gunman to clean my windows. But you don't have to anymore. Not alone." Elena squeezed his hand, marveling at the man he'd become. She'd given him up to give him a better life. And somehow, impossibly, they'd found their way back to each other. Elena moved into the penthouse 2 weeks later. Not as the cleaner, as family. Dante had insisted, had personally overseen the transformation of one of the guest suites into her private space. He'd hired movers for her meager belongings, had filled her closet with clothes she'd never dreamed of owning, had made it clear to everyone in his organization that she was untouchable. It should have felt like a fairy tale. In many ways it did. But fairy tales didn't prepare you for the reality of building a relationship with the son you'd lost 30 years ago. Some days were good. Dante would cook breakfast. He'd learned from the Russo's Italian chef, and they'd sit together in comfortable silence, slowly learning each other's rhythms. He'd tell her stories about growing up in the organization, carefully editing out the worst parts. She'd share memories of her own childhood, of the dreams she'd had before life had taught her to stop dreaming. Other days were hard. Days when the weight of those missing years sat between them like a wall. Days when Dante pulled away, retreating into the cold persona that had protected him for so long. Days when Elena caught herself treating him like the dangerous stranger he'd been 3 months ago, instead of the son he'd always been. But they were trying. That was what mattered. 3 weeks after Elena moved in, the past came knocking. It was just after midnight. Elena was in her room, reading, when she heard raised voices from Dante's office. She'd learned to recognize the sound of business meetings, tense negotiations, territorial disputes, the everyday violence of his world. This was different. This was personal. She heard a woman's voice, sharp with anger. Then a crash. Elena was moving before she could think, pulling on a robe and hurrying down the hall. The office door was open. Inside, Dante stood behind his desk, his face carved from stone. Across from him was a woman in her 60s, elegantly dressed, with steel-gray hair and eyes that could cut glass. "Think you can just throw away everything we gave you?" the woman was saying. "Everything we sacrificed to make you who you are?" "I'm not throwing anything away, Mother." The word was loaded with irony. Elena's stomach dropped. This was Valentina Russo, Dante's adoptive mother. "You moved that woman into our home," Valentina spat. "That woman who abandoned you, who gave you away like trash." "Careful," Dante said, his voice dropping to a lethal quiet. But Valentina was past caring. "We saved you. We took you out of the system, gave you a name, gave you power. And this is how you repay us? By parading your abandonment around like some badge of honor." "Elena is my mother," Dante said flatly. "I am your mother." Valentina's voice broke. "I raised you. I taught you. I loved you when you had nothing and no one. And now you're just going to replace me with—" "Nobody is replacing anyone." Elena spoke from the doorway. Both of them turned to stare at her. She walked into the room slowly, keeping her hands visible, non-threatening. Years of survival instincts guided her movements. "Mrs. Russo," she said quietly, "I'm not here to take anything from you." "Really?" Valentina's laugh was bitter. "Then why are you here? What do you want from my son?" "To know him," Elena said simply. "That's all. Just to know him. You had 30 years to know him. You chose not to." The words were designed to wound, and they hit their mark. Elena flinched, but she didn't back down. "You're right," she said. "I gave him up. I signed papers that said you were his family, and I walked away. I did that because I believed he would be better off with you than with me." "He was," Valentina said coldly. "I know." Elena met her eyes steadily. "I've seen the man he became. The strength, the intelligence, the loyalty, that all came from you. You shaped him. You made him into something extraordinary." Something flickered in Valentina's expression. "But I'm still his mother," Elena continued softly. "I'm the woman who carried him, who brought him into this world, who loved him enough to let him go. That doesn't erase what you did for him. Nothing could. But it also doesn't erase what he is to me." The room was silent. Valentina looked at Dante, and Elena saw something in that look that made her chest ache. Love, fear, desperation. "Dante," Valentina said, and for the first time her voice wavered. "Am I losing you?" Dante moved around the desk and took his adoptive mother's hands. "No," he said firmly. "You're not losing me. You could never lose me. You're my mother in every way that matters. You raised me, you taught me, you loved me. That doesn't change because I've reconnected with Elena." "Then why does it feel like I'm being replaced?" Valentina whispered. "Because you're scared," Dante said gently. "The same way I was scared when I found out Elena had been working for me. The same way Elena is scared every day that I'll decide she's not worth the complication. We're all scared, Mother. But fear is what tears families apart." He looked between the two women, the one who'd raised him and the one who'd given birth to him. "I have room in my life for both of you," he said. "If you'll let me." Valentina's eyes filled with tears. She pulled her hands free from Dante's and turned to Elena. They studied each other for a long moment. "I need to know," Valentina said quietly, "that you're not here to hurt him. That you're not going to leave again." Elena felt the weight of the question, the impossible promise it demanded. "I can't promise I'll never hurt him," she said honestly. "But I can promise I'll never leave him again. Not willingly. Not unless he asks me to." Valentina's jaw clenched. Then, slowly, she nodded. "We're going to have to find a way to make this work," she said. "Yes," Elena agreed. "I'm not calling you anything but Elena. I wouldn't expect you to." "And I'm still his mother," Valentina said fiercely. "You are," Elena said. "You always will be." It wasn't acceptance. Not quite. But it was a beginning. Valentina left a few minutes later, still tense, still wary. But she'd shaken Elena's hand before she went. After she was gone, Dante pulled Elena into a hug. "Thank you," he murmured against her hair. "For what?" "For understanding. For not making me choose." Elena held him tighter. "You're my son. I want you to be happy, even if that means sharing you." They stood there in the quiet office, mother and son, piecing together a relationship 30 years in the making. It wouldn't be easy. There would be more confrontations, more painful conversations, more moments when the past threatened to tear apart the fragile present. But they would face them together. The attack came on a Thursday. Elena had been living with Dante for 2 months. They'd fallen into a rhythm. Breakfasts together, evenings where she'd wait up for him no matter how late his meetings ran, weekends where he'd insist on taking her to museums or restaurants, trying to give her back some of the life she'd sacrificed. She was in the penthouse library when she heard the gunshots. The sound was unmistakable, sharp cracks that echoed through the building. Elena's blood turned to ice. Dante was downstairs in a meeting with rival families, negotiating a truce that had taken weeks to arrange. She grabbed her phone with shaking hands and called him. It went straight to voicemail. More gunshots. Shouting. The sound of breaking glass. Every instinct screamed at her to hide, to make herself invisible the way she'd learned to do decades ago. But that was her son down there. Elena moved to the weapons cabinet Dante had shown her just in case, a scenario she'd prayed would never come. Her hands were steadier than they should have been as she pulled out the handgun he'd taught her to use, checked the magazine, flicked off the safety. The elevator was too slow, too exposed. She took the service stairs, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it over the chaos below. The stairwell opened into the main conference room level. The scene that greeted her was carnage. Bodies on the floor, some moving, some not. Overturned furniture. Blood splattered across the marble. And in the center of it all, Dante, back to back with Marco Russo, surrounded by 6 armed men. The Morettis. Of course. The family that shared her name and had tried to kill her son twice now. One of them had a gun pressed to Dante's temple. "Drop your weapons," the man was saying. "Or the boss dies." Elena didn't hesitate. She stepped out of the stairwell, gun raised, and her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Let him go." Every head turned toward her. She saw shock ripple through the room. A middle-aged woman in casual clothes, holding a gun with surprising confidence. The man holding Dante laughed. "Lady, get out of here before you get hurt." "I said," Elena repeated, her voice deadly calm, "let him go." Dante's eyes were locked on her, wide with horror. "Elena, run. Get out of here. Now." She ignored him. She walked closer, gun trained on the man with the gun to her son's head. "You're Morettis," she said. "So am I, Elena Moretti. And that man you're threatening to kill? That's my son." Confusion rippled through the attackers. "Your son?" The man with the gun to Dante's head frowned. "Russo's not a Moretti. He's born one," Elena interrupted. "Check his birth certificate. I gave him up 30 years ago, and he was adopted by the Russos. But he's mine, and you don't touch what's mine." "She's lying," someone said. "Check the records," Elena said calmly. "I'll wait." The man pulled out his phone with one hand, keeping his gun on Dante with the other. He barked orders in Italian. Waited. His expression changed as he read something on the screen. "Holy shit," he breathed. "She's telling the truth." Russo's mother was Elena Moretti from Brooklyn. Born 1979. Gave him up for adoption in 2001. "Which means," Elena said softly, "you're about to murder a Moretti. One of your own bloodline. Is that really what you want?" The men exchanged uncertain glances. In their world, blood mattered. Family mattered. "He's still a Russo," the leader said, but his conviction was wavering. "He's both," Elena said. "And I'm asking you, as a Moretti, as his mother, to let him go. End this feud. Stop the killing." "They killed our people," someone protested. "And you've killed theirs," Elena countered. "When does it stop?" "When everyone's dead. When there's no one left to remember what you were even fighting about in the first place." Silence fell over the room. Then, slowly, the man lowered his gun from Dante's head. "This doesn't end here," he said. "But we'll talk. Out of respect for blood." He gestured to his men, and they began to retreat, dragging their wounded with them. The moment they were gone, Dante crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled Elena into his arms. "What the hell were you thinking?" His voice shook. "You could have been killed. You should have stayed hidden. You're my son," Elena said simply. "Did you really think I would hide while someone threatened to kill you?" He pulled back to look at her, and she saw her own fierce protectiveness reflected in his eyes. "Where did you learn to handle a gun like that?" he demanded. "From you. 3 weeks ago. Remember? I taught you basic safety, not—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "You're insane. You know that." "I learned from the best," she said with a small smile. "Despite everything," he laughed. Then he pulled her close again, and she felt him shaking. "I can't lose you," he whispered against her hair. "Not when I just got you back." "You won't," Elena promised. "I'm not going anywhere." Marco Russo appeared at Dante's shoulder, pressing a cloth to a bleeding cut on his forehead. "Your mother," he said, "is either the bravest or the craziest woman I've ever met." "Both," Dante said. "Definitely both." She also just negotiated a truce that 3 months of meetings couldn't accomplish. Marco grinned despite the blood on his face. Using the one angle none of us thought of, family connection. Elena looked around at the destroyed conference room, at the wounded men being tended to, at her son alive and whole beside her. "I meant what I said," she told them both. The fighting has to stop. Too many people have died. Too many families destroyed. It ends now. You think it's that simple? Marco asked, not unkindly. No, Elena said. But it starts with one choice. One person deciding that survival is more important than revenge. One family deciding that the future matters more than the past. She looked at Dante. Isn't that what I did when I gave you up? Chose your future over my own pain. He stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. We'll talk, he said. With the Morettis. Negotiate a real peace, not just a temporary truce. They'll want concessions, Marco warned. Then we'll give them concessions, Dante said. My mother is right. This ends now. 3 weeks later, the peace treaty was signed in the same conference room where Elena had walked in holding a gun. The Morettis came, older men in expensive suits, wary but willing to talk. And Elena sat at the table beside her son, no longer invisible, no longer silent. She was Elena Moretti Russo now, mother to the most powerful mafia boss in New York. Bridge between two warring families. The woman who had survived everything life threw at her and had finally come home. 5 years later, Elena stood in the garden of the Russo estate, acres of manicured perfection in upstate New York, far from the violence and chaos of the city. The party swirled around her, Russos and Morettis mingling, the old grudges if not forgotten, at least set aside. Children ran shrieking through the rose bushes, including her grandson, the child Valentina and Antonio Russo had adopted 2 years ago. Because Dante had fallen in love. With a teacher, of all people, a woman who'd walked into his life and somehow convinced him that there was more to living than just surviving. Elena watched her son across the garden, his arm around his wife, laughing at something Marco was saying. He looked different now. Lighter. As if he'd finally set down a weight he'd been carrying for too long. He's happy, Valentina said, appearing at Elena's elbow with 2 glasses of wine. He is, Elena agreed, taking the offered glass. They stood side by side, the 2 mothers who'd shaped the man Dante had become. Their relationship would never be easy. Too much history, too much pain. But they'd learned to coexist, bound together by their shared love for the same person. Thank you, Elena said quietly. For raising him. For making him into someone extraordinary. Valentina was silent for a moment. Then, thank you for giving him life. And for coming back. He needed you, even if he didn't know it. It wasn't forgiveness. Not quite. But it was peace. Dante caught sight of them and waved, gesturing for them both to come join the family. Elena and Valentina exchanged glances, then walked toward him together. As Elena slipped her arm through her son's, as Valentina took his other side, as the 3 of them stood surrounded by family, blood and chosen, old and new, Elena thought about the terrified 16-year-old girl who'd signed away her rights to her baby. She thought about the woman who'd spent 30 years wondering if she'd made the right choice. She thought about the moment she'd walked into Dante's penthouse as his cleaner, desperate for just a glimpse of the child she'd lost. And she thought, we made it. Against all odds, we made it. The path had been brutal. The cost had been high. But standing here, in this garden, with her son's arm around her and his laughter in her ears and his love wrapping around her like a shield, it had been worth it. Every single moment. Every sacrifice. Every tear. All of it. Mom, Dante said softly, and the words still made her heart skip. You okay? Elena looked up at him, this powerful, dangerous, beautiful man who'd somehow found his way back to her, and smiled. I'm perfect, she said. And for the first time in 30 years, it was true. And so ends the journey of Elena and Dante, a mother's unbreakable love spanning 3 decades, proving that some bonds can survive anything, even years of separation and worlds of difference. If this story touched your heart, Leave a like and share it with someone who believes in the power of family. More emotional journeys are coming soon. See you in the next story.